Karen Pemberton stood in her neighbor's backyard at 6:47 a.m., wearing nothing but a hot pink bathrobe and fuzzy slippers, screaming at the empty concrete crater where the Hendersons' pool used to be. "Where is my water?" she shrieked, her voice cracking like a teenage boy's. The absurdity of the scene would have been comical if not for the garden hose she was brandishing like a weapon. Mrs. Henderson peered through her kitchen window, coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips. 3 months ago, Karen had declared herself the unofficial pool monitor of Maple Grove Estates after being elected HOA president by a margin of exactly 1 vote, her own, cast 3 times using different colored pens. Since then, she treated every backyard pool in the subdivision like her personal domain. "You can't just drain community water without HOA approval," Karen bellowed, completely ignoring the fact that it wasn't community water at all. Her voice echoed off the empty pool walls, creating an almost demonic reverb effect. A jogger stopped dead in his tracks on the sidewalk, pulling out his phone to record what appeared to be a middle-aged woman having a complete breakdown over an empty swimming pool. The Hendersons had drained their pool the night before for necessary repairs. The concrete had developed several cracks over the winter, and their pool contractor had recommended a complete resurfacing. It was a routine maintenance job that any reasonable person would understand, but Karen Pemberton had never been accused of being reasonable. "THEFT of nay AB or hod res or seas," she continued, now pacing around the pool's perimeter like a deranged lifeguard. Her slippers made squeaking sounds against the wet concrete where residual water remained. She pulled out her phone and began typing furiously with her thumbs, her acrylic nails kicking against the screen like castanets. Dave Henderson finally emerged from his house, wearing pajama pants and a bewildered expression. "Karen, what are you doing in my backyard?" She whipped around to face him, her blonde highlights catching the morning sun like a warning beacon. "Your backyard? This pool affects the entire neighborhood's aesthetic value. The HOA covenant clearly states that any major alterations to outdoor spaces require 48 hours written notice. It's pool maintenance," Dave said slowly, speaking as if addressing a particularly volatile wild animal. "We'll have it refilled in 2 weeks." 2 weeks? Karen's voice rose to a pitch that probably bothered dogs 3 streets over. "Do you have any idea how this reflects on our property values? What if potential buyers drive by and see this crater of neglect?" She began taking photos of the empty pool from multiple angles, muttering about documenting the violation and preserving evidence for the municipal authorities. Dave watched in fascination as she crouched down to capture what she called the full scope of the damage. The morning sun climbed higher, and more neighbors began to emerge for their daily routines. Karen seemed to feed off the growing audience, her performance becoming increasingly theatrical. She climbed onto a pool chair and addressed the gathering crowd like a politician at a rally. "This is about more than one pool," she declared, one hand on her hip, the other pointing dramatically at the empty basin. "This is about respect. This is about community standards. This is about the very fabric that holds Maple Grove Estates together." Mrs. Chen from next door whispered to her husband, "Should we call someone?" Karen overheard and turned toward them with laser focus. "Yes, call the city planning office. Call the water department. This kind of reckless drainage could affect the entire municipal system." As her voice carried across the neighborhood, Karen felt a familiar surge of righteous energy. This wasn't just about the Hendersons' pool anymore. This was her moment to prove that the HOA presidency meant something. That she meant something. The empty pool had become her battlefield, and she was just getting started. By 10 a.m., Karen had returned home, showered, and emerged in full HOA presidential regalia, a navy blazer with shoulder pads that belonged in 1987, a clipboard thick enough to stop a bullet, and a laminated badge that read, "HOA President, official BUSNES only." She marched back to the Henderson property with the confidence of someone who had never been wrong about anything in her life. Dave Henderson was now in his front yard, clearly hoping to avoid another backyard confrontation. Karen spotted him immediately and strode across his lawn with purpose, leaving small divots in the perfect grass with her sensible heels. "Mr. Henderson," she announced formally, "I've contacted the appropriate authorities regarding your unauthorized pool drainage. You have violated sections 4.7, 6.2, and 8.11 of the Maple Grove Estates Community Guidelines." Dave blinked. "Karen, I've lived here for 15 years. There is no section 8.11. Our guidelines only have 7 sections. Are you questioning my knowledge of HOA regulations?" Karen's voice carried that dangerous edge that her ex-husband had learned to recognize moments before she demanded to speak to managers. "Because I happen to have a very clear memory of the expanded guidelines we implemented last month." "What expanded guidelines? We haven't had an HOA meeting since January." Karen's grip tightened on her clipboard. She had indeed written several new sections to the guidelines in her head during long evenings when the silence of her empty house became too overwhelming. The lines between her imagined authority and actual authority had blurred somewhere between her 3rd glass of wine and her 4th viewing of Judge Judy reruns. "The water department will be here within the hour," she declared, deflecting from the guidelines discussion. This was technically true, though they were coming to read the meter, not investigate pool drainage, and I filed a formal complaint with the city planning office about unauthorized excavation. Dave's neighbor, Miguel Santos, walked over with his morning coffee. "Hey Karen, what's all this about unauthorized excavation?" "Dave's just fixing his pool." "Miguel." Karen turned to him with the intensity of a laser beam. "As a member of this community, you should be concerned about precedents. Today, it's pool drainage without notice. Tomorrow, it could be deck additions, garden modifications, or worse, unauthorized fence installations." Miguel sipped his coffee slowly. "Karen, you installed a new garden gnome last week without telling anyone. Garden accessories under 12 inches fall under maintenance, not modification." Karen shot back without missing a beat. She had actually made this rule up on the spot, but delivered it with such conviction that for a moment, even she believed it. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the city water department truck. Karen's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. She had called them claiming there was a potential municipal water system disruption in her neighborhood. The fact that they had actually shown up felt like divine validation of her authority. 2 city workers emerged from the truck, looking confused and slightly annoyed. The older one, Frank, had been dealing with HOA complaints for over 20 years and could spot a Karen situation from 3 blocks away. "Someone called about unauthorized water drainage?" Frank asked wearily, consulting his clipboard. "Yes." Karen practically sprinted toward him, her heels clicking on the pavement. This resident drained approximately 20,000 gallons of community water without proper permits or consideration for municipal impact. Frank looked at the empty pool, then at Karen, then back at the pool. "Ma'am, homeowners don't need permits to drain their own pools. And it's not community water, they paid for it." "But surely there are environmental concerns, drainage protocols, impact assessments. Lady, people drain pools all the time. It's not a big deal." Karen felt the first crack in her armor of righteous indignation, but rather than retreat, she doubled down with the desperation of someone whose entire identity was wrapped up in being right about everything. "Then perhaps we need to discuss the aesthetic impact on neighborhood property values." She pivoted smoothly. "As HOA president, I have a responsibility to protect our community's investment." Frank exchanged a look with his partner that said, "Here we go again." Dave Henderson stepped forward, sensing an opportunity to end this madness. "Karen, I'm sorry I didn't give you advance notice. I'll make sure to send an email next time." But Karen had gone too far to accept a simple apology. She had called city workers, made public declarations, and proclaimed herself the guardian of community water resources. Backing down now would mean admitting she had been wrong. And admitting wrongness was not in Karen Pemberton's emotional vocabulary. "This isn't personal," she said, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "This is about maintaining standards. If we let one violation slide, where does it end? It ends with people living their lives without harassment. Dave replied, his patience finally beginning to fray. It ends with neighbors treating each other like human beings instead of municipal code violations. Karen's jaw tightened. She had spent 6 hours researching, documenting, and preparing her case. She had called 17 different city departments and created what she considered to be a thoroughly professional remediation plan. The suggestion that all of this work was somehow unreasonable or excessive felt like a direct attack on her competence. If you're not willing to engage in the proper resolution process, she said, closing her folder with a sharp snap, then I'll have no choice but to escalate this matter to the appropriate enforcement agencies. What enforcement agencies, Karen? It's a swimming pool. But Karen was already walking back toward her house, her mind racing with new possibilities. If city departments wouldn't take her seriously, and if her neighbors refused to acknowledge her authority, then perhaps it was time to bring in reinforcements. Real reinforcements. She had a cousin who knew someone who worked in code enforcement. She had a book about citizens' rights that specifically mentioned something about property law, and she had the phone number for the non-emergency police line saved in her contacts from the time teenagers had been skateboarding too loudly in the street. By evening, Karen had convinced herself that she wasn't just fighting for proper pool drainage protocols anymore. She was fighting for the very concept of law and order in residential communities. And if that fight required calling in professional backup, then that's exactly what she intended to do. By afternoon, Karen had transformed her dining room into what she called Incident Command Central. Her laptop was open to 17 different browser tabs, ranging from municipal water rights to HOA legal precedents, to how to file a small claims lawsuit. Her printer had been working overtime, spitting out pages of regulations she'd found buried in the depths of various government websites, most of which had nothing to do with swimming pools. She had also created a PowerPoint presentation titled The Henderson Pool Drainage Incident, a comprehensive analysis of community impact. It contained 43 slides, including a hand-drawn chart showing theoretical property value depreciation and a pie graph titled Neighborhood Morale Distribution During Pool Crisis. Her phone rang every 20 minutes as she called various city departments, each conversation following the same pattern: confident introduction, detailed complaint, growing frustration, and finally demands to speak with supervisors. By 3 p.m., she had unknowingly become a minor legend among municipal customer service representatives. Yes, this is Karen Pemberton, HOA president of Maple Grove Estates, she said into her phone, pacing around her living room with military precision. I need to speak with someone about filing an emergency injunction against unauthorized water displacement. The poor clerk on the other end tried to explain that pool drainage wasn't technically water displacement, but Karen had already moved on to discussing precedent-setting violations of community trust. Meanwhile, Dave Henderson was attempting to enjoy a peaceful Saturday afternoon when his doorbell rang. Through the peephole, he could see Karen standing on his porch holding what appeared to be a manila folder the size of a phone book. Dave, she announced when he opened the door, I've prepared a comprehensive remediation plan for this situation. She handed him the folder, which was surprisingly heavy. Inside were 27 pages of typed text, complete with section headers, subsections, and footnotes. The document was titled Proposed Resolution Protocol for Unauthorized Pool Drainage Incident, Case Number 1 HPD. Karen, this is insane. You wrote 27 pages about my pool. Proper documentation is the foundation of effective community governance, she replied with the seriousness of someone announcing nuclear launch codes. I've outlined 3 possible resolution paths, each with detailed implementation timelines and community impact assessments. Dave flipped through the pages, his eyes widening at section titles like Economic Impact Mitigation Strategies and Community Trust Rebuilding Initiatives. In the middle of page 14, Karen had included a budget breakdown showing how Dave could reimburse the neighborhood for aesthetic disruption damages, totaling $847.33. You want me to pay you $800 because I drained my pool? $847.33, Karen corrected. That's calculated based on theoretical property value impact across all affected properties, plus administrative fees for complaint processing and documentation preparation. Dave's wife, Sarah, appeared behind him, drawn by the sound of their conversation. She took one look at Karen's folder and immediately understood that they were dealing with someone who had completely lost touch with reality. "Karen," Sarah said gently, "we've been neighbors for 3 years. We've helped you with your groceries. You've borrowed our hedge trimmer. Why are you doing this over a pool?" For just a moment, Karen's militant expression wavered. The mention of borrowed hedge trimmers and grocery help reminded her of a time when she felt connected to these people, when being neighbors meant something warmer than formal complaints and documentation protocols. But the moment passed quickly, crushed under the weight of Karen's need to be right, to be important, to prove that her opinions mattered. The empty pool had become a symbol of every time someone had dismissed her, ignored her input, or treated her like she didn't know what she was talking about.